Hi, so I'm so excited that we're actually here tonight. I feel like we've been trying to get on Zoom for months and months now. And tonight is just the perfect opportunity to get started. What better opportunity do we have? Um,
Mhm.
and I really do feel like this is going to be a night to remember. We're going to look back on this and say, wow, we were so nervous to do this. Why didn't we start earlier? But here we are.
Yeah, so I think maybe we should tell people who we are
Sure.
and then get into talking. You want to start?
Sure. So I'm Stephanie Rodker. I live in New Jersey, born and raised. I've Carrie's going to introduce herself, but we've been lifelong friends. Um, and we just decided to go on this journey together.
Yep, that's true. So I'm Carrie Coweely, Dr. Carrie. Um, Stephanie and I have been friends for almost 25 years, 23 to be exact. How old were you?
I was 14 going on 15. We met at the mall because our siblings were grounded.
Yeah. So we need to get into that too. But um, I must have been, that means 16, because I'm like, what, 2 years older than you?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So we've known each other for a really long time. We've always been soulmates, best friends, and we've gone through a hell of a lot together, haven't we?
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
our banters are always incredible, and we continue to say, like, when we speak, we need to record this, and we never do. So we decided we were just gonna try it today and see what happens.
I'm sure there's a lot of people just like us who had to just do it. Just like Nike says, just freaking do it.
Let's not
And
make
I
this
also
political. You know how
Yeah, and I
Nike
also
is
want
about
this to be a
this.
discussion where we're ourselves. So you might hear cursing, you might hear weird context, but you know what? We're going to be ourselves, and
Yeah,
that's all we can
truth.
do.
Yeah, we're Jersey girls. We have potty mouths. Sorry. If you don't like it, just turn us off.
And why don't you tell everyone where you are now? Because you're not in
Okay, yeah. So I'm in North Carolina with my family. Moved around a lot. Moved from New Jersey to Utah, where I got my PhD. That's why I'm Dr. Carrie. And then moved with my husband with the military to Georgia, and then to North Carolina for a job, military related as well.
nice. So
And that's where
work-wise
we
for
are.
myself, I've been, working from home the past 8 months because of COVID, along with my almost 2-year-old daughter, and it's just us. And so that's basically what's, going on here with me in Jersey.
Mhm. Yep. And
What about you? You want to talk about your kids?
yeah, and then let's get going. But
Yeah.
I have three little ones, and I'm actually homeschooling right now
Nice.
because not actually because of COVID, but not because of COVID, but at some point we'll get into that.
I'm sure there's many reasons why it's better now because of COVID.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
truth.
So what I actually wanted to talk to you about earlier is something that I read that is just blew my mind.
Okay.
And it opens a
Oh
whole can
gosh.
of worms like normal, but we have to start somewhere. So I read
Okay.
an article that said that there was Phil Murphy, our governor in New Jersey is Phil Murphy. I'm sure everyone has heard of him. He has crazy restrictions and uh, policies due to COVID that I just can't seem to get on board with. However, a large population of New Jersey thinks he's doing a fantastic job.
Mm.
So he's
Like no
often,
more than 10 people at
right,
Thanksgiving.
exactly. So often he's been found out floating around the Jersey Shore having dinner at five-star restaurants with his family.
Mm-hmm.
So tonight he was out with his family, his wife Tammy, and their 3 teenager kids. And this woman came up to his table and said, "I'm so glad you're able to feast while the rest of us are walking around these fucking masks."
Good for her.
So he then took his mask, put it up in front of his face, and said, "Ma'am, please put your mask on." And she said,
Wow.
I'm not going to put my mask on." And so his kids then got involved and asked the lady to please walk away. And I'm not really sure what the outcome was, but that was the conversation. And that leads me to to a topic that you had brought up the other night. Is Phil Murphy honestly scared of COVID? Because his reaction tonight at dinner leads me to believe maybe he is very scared.
Uh-huh.
Or was he putting the mask up to his face as kind of like, I have to play this role?
Okay, can I ask a few more questions? Like, you may not even know the answer to
Mhm.
this, but I just want some context. So where were they at dinner? What was the story? Did he walk in with a
They
mask? Was he
were
following all the rules?
they were out, they were sitting outside, dining
Okay,
outside somewhere.
okay, okay.
And I don't really know much else. I just know that as soon as this woman walked over to him and started talking about the masks, he quickly put his mask up like she was going to
Like
kill
in
him.
front of his face. He didn't
Yeah.
actually put it on. Hmm.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I some part of me believes that he truly believes that this is something that is serious,
Hmm.
that can potentially be deadly, and he wants to protect himself and his community and state.
Right.
Um, but to me, and let's backtrack and say neither Stephanie or think that this or I think that this is a hoax. We
Hmm.
totally believe that COVID is a real thing. We do believe that it has the potential to be dangerous and, of course, can be deadly. But we also have seen all of the statistics come out from the CDC and all of the information that's been provided for us. And we've come to learn that you're more statistically likely to die in a car crash, from choking, or from a fire. Than you are from COVID. And even the most vulnerable population at 70 and above is half as likely to die from COVID as they are from the flu. And
Right.
that's with the flu vaccination.
Right.
So the thing that I find really hard to believe is, how can he believe that this is dangerous if he just looks for the facts?
Well, how do we know who's feeding him the information to make these decisions? Do we
Well, I mean,
trust?
the information that I just gave you, other than me telling you because of statistics that you're more likely to choke and fire and those other things,
Hmm.
are directly on the CDC website. It's not like they're hidden. It's not
Right.
like there's something that you can't find. So to me, he became elected, he's the governor of New Jersey. Why wouldn't he be looking for information for himself? Why would he be allowing somebody to give him, and granted, who would even be giving him information?
I think he might be too busy to even be looking for it himself. That could be the problem.
I mean, how ridiculous
He
is that, Steph?
he has a team of people that I'm sure are feeding him information.
Well, I understand that when you're the governor, I keep saying government, but when you are the governor
Hmm.
of a state, it's very important that you find out knowledge on your own and you don't, especially something as big as this. Okay, it makes sense if you're finding out information about something that's not super important, but COVID is so prevalent and it is affecting our economy, our society. Our children are not in school because of it.
Hmm.
So why would you be relying? I mean, people were extremely critical of Donald Trump when he allowed Vice President, oh my gosh, I'm blanking, what's his name, Pence, Vice
Pence.
President Pence, to be in charge of the coronavirus task force. So why would we allow Murphy to have some sort of an excuse as to getting information from other people
I
if we
agree.
won't allow Trump to have the same
If
excuse?
anything, he should be getting it more himself because I'm sure he has more time on his hands than Trump, especially to be doing something like that.
Hmm. Well,
That's his
and the
main
fact that
concern for the state.
yeah, and the fact that there's two different sides, like if everyone was on the same page, and not even two different sides, there's many different sides to
Hmm.
this. If everybody was on the same page, I could understand why he might be getting it from somebody, but there's so many different narratives. When you're hearing so many different things, it is your due diligence and your obligation as the person in charge of an entire state to do your own research.
I agree. And that's the problem. And I think that's the problem with most American people is they're not doing their own research. They're
Mm-hmm.
relying on the media and they're relying on all of our officials.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, we don't trust our officials.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Everything's been spun in a way to create fear for the American people. Why have we not once heard from the mainstream media and the health officials things that we can do besides wearing a mask and social distancing to help ourselves starve off or fight COVID, number one, if we get it, or number two, to fight the virus? I mean, if you think about any other virus out there, there's tried and true ways to help fight that virus or to protect yourself from getting it. Why aren't we hearing any of these things?
So let's talk about some of those things, because you and I very know well those things. And we haven't been told that by the media. We've been told
where did we get it from? Maybe we need to share that with people.
Maybe we need to figure that out. I mean, we know that being outside and getting exercise and fresh air builds our immune system. It doesn't suppress us. Yet we're not allowed to go outside. Most of my walking paths in my neighborhood have been shut down.
So this is an interesting thing.
And I live in a condo, so I don't have a backyard to bring myself and my daughter outside to. The only option is for us to walk outside. Well, when we don't have that, what are we supposed to do?
Well, it's really funny because Stephanie and I live in two different states, as we mentioned in the beginning. She lives in a very Democratic state. I live in a more Republican state. During the election, you saw that New Jersey went to Biden. North Carolina went to Trump, and it's really interesting. The governor of our state is actually Democratic, but the rules and laws, people are following them, but much more loosely. Stephanie's been kicked out of stores. She can tell you about it. I have never once been kicked out of a store. I think somebody said something to me one time, and I brought the statistics from the CDC, which maybe we should talk about. Up to her, and we actually had about a half-hour conversation, and she, was very apologetic, but explained to me that it was her corporation that was forcing her to do these things, and she feared losing her job, which I completely understood.
I get that.
Otherwise, I've never had an issue.
Right. And when I went down to visit Carrie a few weeks ago down in North Carolina, the things that they have in place at the grocery stores and just in general is how New Jersey was before COVID happened. You wouldn't have even known there was something going on in North Carolina compared to how New Jersey looks. And I was just shocked to see that.
And a lot of people do wear masks, but you see a lot more people who don't.
Right. And there was no plexiglass in the stores and barriers and markers and signs. Here, it's like you feel like you're walking into a jail when you walk into a store. At least that's how I feel.
That's especially with a child. That's pretty terrifying. That's scary.
So going back to the other things that we can do to kind of help ourselves with a virus, what are those things that they're not telling us that we should be doing on a daily basis?
Well, I think, only from reading, you and I clearly don't have medical degrees, so we can't give, medical advice, but from reading things like anything you would do for something like the common cold,
or the flu.
Vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc. Another article that I read said something about what's the natural sleep aid?
Melatonin
helps. Keeping yourself hydrated is another
decreasing
thing.
Your sugar intake, because sugar kind of prolongs a virus and exacerbates it.
That actually brings us to the issue of chronic illness. I mean, if you look at the CDC's website, what you'll see is that they have the death rates, what they put as the infection fatality rate, broken down into different ages. And what they say is that, so they give 5 different scenarios, and they call them planning scenarios. And they say they give you an R0 quotient. Steph, tell me if this makes sense, because if it doesn't make sense, I'll try to explain it better. So R represents a person. 0 represents the number of cases that a person, or number of people the person has infected. So if the person infects 0 people, they are R0. If they infect 1 person, they become R1. If they infect 2 people, they become R2, and so on. Well, COVID's infection rate is somewhere around 2 to to 5. So they do these quote unquote planning scenarios.
Right.
Where they do it from 1 to 4, but they have a best case scenario, which is a person infecting 2.5 other people.
Right.
So with those numbers, the IFR, which is the infection fatality rate, which means the number of people infected by the virus divided by, the number of people who are infected by the virus and die from the virus divided by the number of people who are actually infected by the virus. So for people from 0 to 20, the number, and I'm going to put my fingers up,
age. You're
From
talking
0
age.
to 20, the infection fatality rate, which means the death rate, and they've collected these statistics through numbers that they've gotten throughout the months on COVID cases, is, let me count it for you, Stephanie, it's 0.00002. That means that about 3 in 10,000 children will die from COVID. Now, I haven't actually looked this up, but in my mind, you're no more likely to die from COVID than you are from chance. For somebody who is from 20 to 50, their infection fatality rate is 0.0003. For somebody from 50 to 70, their infection fatality rate is 0.005. And for somebody who is 70 and above, their infection fatality rate is 0.05. So that's a little bit higher.
Yes.
But what they don't, did you want to say something?
Well, it just reminds me of something else, that when they talked about the transmission rate, like you started saying in the beginning, that when we flattened the curve and got this number low, that the restrictions would go away and business as normal. Well, we got those numbers, yet we got more restrictions.
Yeah, you're right. And that's true. And we're still doing these things, and these numbers don't seem to be decreasing. So the question is, what's going on? Now, I don't have the answer to that, but I just want to finish what I was saying, because there's a really good point to make. From 70 and above, it doesn't actually differentiate between people who are older and people who are younger and healthy, or even older and healthy. So basically, the CDC also says on their website that people who are dying of COVID have 2 to 3 plus chronic illnesses. Their average age is 80. And depending on what state you're in, 40 to 80% of these people are living in nursing homes. Well, the average lifespan of somebody living in a nursing home is between 4 to 5 months, and extreme outliers live to about 14 months. So, and these people, did I say the 3 plus chronic illnesses? These people have 3 plus chronic illnesses.
Right. It's not your average healthy person.
Exactly. And granted, we're not trying to, make light of people dying, but we're trying to make people understand that these people, most of them who have died from COVID, are very, very sick people.
Right.
There was another point that I was going to make, but I forget. So did you have anything to add?
No, I think you make a great point that, people think this is so scary, especially when you're seeing everyone walk around with a mask. But they're not being told, or they're not doing the research to find out that it's not your average healthy person. And there's always the exception. There's always going to be that person who worked out, ate perfectly healthy, went to the gym 5 times a day, and still died of COVID. But most people are dying with COVID, not because of COVID.
Can you explain that? Because
Sure.
I will if you don't want to. Go ahead.
Sure. So the difference of dying with COVID and because of COVID is basically, let's say someone was in a car accident and in their autopsy, they happened to give that person a COVID test. Well, they're being coded as COVID, even though we all really know it was the car accident that caused the death of the person. If someone died of suicide and they,
died with COVID,
they're being coded as died of COVID. No, they hung themselves. They was truly suicide. Right. Even someone who died of cancer, and may have gotten COVID at the end of their, battle with cancer,
Mhm.
it's being coded as a death from COVID. No, it was
Mhm.
actually cancer of 5 years that was killing this person.
Yeah. Well, there I have a perfect example of that. My uncle John was
Hmm.
92 years old. He was in a
Okay.
nursing home. He had a stroke in the
Hmm.
nursing home. It was a stroke that would have ended up deadly, but he
Hmm.
was still alive. He was transferred to the hospital. He wouldn't have made it out of the hospital because he had a deadly stroke, but he contracted COVID in the hospital. So guess what? Uncle John, who was 92 years old, who had a stroke that was going to kill him, died of COVID because he contracted COVID in the hospital.
And is that what they put on his death certificate?
Yes.
That's terribly sad.
Hmm.
And
It
these are the
is.
numbers that are going into that
Hmm.
every day that you see on TV of we have this many cases, well, or deaths
Well,
for that
let's
matter.
make this point, Steph. 6%. So on the CDC website, everything that we're talking about is on the CDC website. We're not finding this in any like
We're
conspiracy,
making it
not the
up.
National Enquirer or anything like that. This is all on the CDC. 6% of people who have died of COVID have truly died of COVID. So that means 94% have died with some sort of chronic illness, but usually 2 or 3 more.
So what is the
So
number of the purely COVID deaths? Do you know what
it
that
hovers
number is?
around 10,000.
Okay.
It may be a
So,
little bit more at this point because that was about a month or two
right.
ago,
Which is
but
still a
it's
lot of people. However,
10,
when you compare it to the population, it's
700
less
million.
than the amount of people that die of pneumonia, tuberculosis, the flu, so many other viruses that we have every single winter or throughout the year, yet we don't shut down, we don't mask up for, we do not have restrictions for.
Well, another thing that's interesting, you bring up a really good point, is that 98% of the flu cases since COVID started, the flu cases and pneumonia cases have decreased by 98%.
They're all being coded
And
as COVID.
they are, well, interestingly enough, I want to say it was, my number may be totally wrong here and I'd have to look back, but it was something like 67,000. I may be totally off. I really need to look at that, but it was in, the thousands for people who were dying of influenza and
Right.
pneumonia. Now, granted, maybe having the two together killed them. I don't know, but
It might have.
it's certainly suspect that the flu and pneumonia cases or influenza and pneumonia cases are down 98%.
Right. It's interesting.
And Steph, you know what the other thing we should talk about is the idea of this not being just the flu.
Right.
The fact that when an agenda is pushed about the flu and you need to get your flu shot, the flu is extremely deadly. And actually, the flu is very deadly. The flu has an infection fatality rate of 0.1 for all people. I couldn't
Right.
find anything that divided for ages. Flu kills young, flu kills old.
Right.
So, um, when we say this is not just the flu, we're acting like the flu isn't anything serious. And I think that that's a huge mistake because the flu can cause very serious illness as well. You can have side effects from the flu. I was researching it the other day and they're saying, oh, COVID has all these lasting side effects. Well,
Right.
so does the flu. Like it can lead to stroke. It can lead to heart attack. You can have lasting lung issues,
Mm-hmm.
just like COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's something that there is to think about too. It's now just the flu because COVID's out there, but it certainly wasn't 2 years ago when they were trying to push the flu shot on us.
But you have to also remember that people are very soothed by the fact that there's a vaccine for the flu, tuberculosis, pneumonia, all these things, yet
Mm-hmm.
they're not as effective as people think. And even the effectiveness that they're saying that the COVID shot is going to have is still less than the survival rate of just getting it without any shots on your own and
I
surviving.
shouldn't laugh, but it's true.
So I do think we should save the whole flu conversation for a next conversation because it's
Yeah,
very
or a
embedded
different
and
conversation. Yeah,
yeah, we could definitely get
but
into that.
I mean,
But I
I
think we
think
need
I
to
think
keep
you.
in mind that people
Yeah,
get
go.
very soothed by the word vaccination. And again, that's a whole other conversation that we will
Absolutely. We're not going there. But what
dive
we will
into.
say is it's interesting how people are really excited that this vaccine is 90% effective,
Right,
but don't think about the fact that their body is
right,
99.96 or 99.996 or 95%
yep.
effective
We
at at, at curing themselves from COVID. Your body is a spectacular
We've
piece of equipment
mhm.
that that is very good at healing us if we allow. But we've been told over and over that it's something, or that our bodies are flawed, that our bodies can't protect us, that we need all of these things put into us to, and granted, don't get me wrong, there clearly are deadly diseases out there. I am not suggesting that there are not things that we need to take seriously, but we have also been taught that our bodies betray us all the time. Our bodies are shameful, they're not good things. We put all of this junk in our body with chemicals, and we don't keep ourselves healthy, and that's a huge issue, because if we were healthier as a nation, we would be less likely to succumb to COVID.
Right. And that kind of goes back to a conversation we've also had about we've been brainwashed at such a young age that our bodies can't fight for themselves. We're given medication for everything. We're given vaccines since before we're even born. We get vaccines when we're in the womb.
Yeah.
So what is that teaching us from the day we're born, that we can't survive without all this medicine, all these
Mm-hmm.
vaccinations
Mm-hmm.
on
It's
our
teaching
own?
us that we're weak. It's teaching
Exactly.
us that there's something wrong with us,
Yeah.
and that's a huge thread throughout society. People don't like the way they look. They don't, like their weight. They are constantly trying to do things to change their bodies. People are always,
Right.
we are our own worst critics. We're very
Yes.
hard on ourselves because it's fed to us from day one,
Right.
or
Exactly.
before day one for that matter.
So, Carrie, what do you think like a good wrap up from this conversation would be? Just kind of like tying in where we're going to start and where do you see us going from here?
Well, I think we were, well, why don't we bring it back to the whole Governor Murphy thing? I think that what you need to do, if you really think that Governor Murphy is keeping you safe, I respect that. But I ask that you go online and do the research yourself. Don't look at mainstream media websites. Read articles from scientific journals. And that's another thing that's really hard. Like I know that I'm able to do that. I know that other people aren't able to do that. But Stephanie brings up a good point. If Murphy's getting his information from, other people, I'm sure a lot of us are doing that as well. Don't
Yep.
just take one person's word on it. Get information from a bunch of sources. That truthfully is science. The fact that people are being censored and not allowed to share what they believe if it doesn't fit the mainstream agenda is such an incredibly scary thing for me as a scientist, as somebody who is in academia, because I have been taught through my entire career. I have 13 years of schooling post grade school under my belt, and I've always been taught that you get information from a bunch of different sources. In fact, when
Yeah.
I was doing my dissertation, I was told when you're doing your dissertation, you have to do a lit review, which means that you have to do an exhaustive study of all of the information that is out there so that you make sure you're not missing something, that you can make sure that you're not like going on a tangent or something that you're thinking is false. And you have to be able to get as much information on the topic to make sure that you have something to support this dissertation. So the
And that
fact
you're
that
not
they've
being biased.
Exactly, that you're not being biased. Good point, Steph. So the fact that they've closed down all of these avenues, all of these people who are speaking out and saying that these licensed doctors and clinicians and people who are working with COVID on a regular basis, and these epidemiologists that are heads of state and Nobel Peace Prize winners and so many other people are conspiracy theorists, it just blows my mind. So to wrap this up, I think what we really need to say, Steph, is to tell people, you don't have to believe me and Stephanie, but we encourage you to go out and find a number of different sources on
Yep.
both sides of the fence that aren't just Fox News or CNN.
And think about who is funding CNN and Fox. It's the big pharma companies, it's big tech, it's all these people that are
Well, tell them
telling
how they
them,
know that, because don't make them take your word for it. How do you know
okay,
that they're
I
funding?
you can find out by just watching the commercials. I know that a lot of people usually press mute and go get a snack during a commercial. The next time a commercial comes on when you're watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC or whatever media channel outlet you have, instead of going to get a drink, sit down and watch those commercials. I'll bet you that 8 out of 10 are a drug commercial or a fast food commercial, things that are not making us healthy. And if you think about it, commercials are what fund channels. So if
Mhm.
Big Pharma is giving money to Fox or CNN,
They're going to push their
they're
agenda, and
definitely
that'll be
telling
another
them what they can or
conversation.
can't talk about.
Yeah, yeah, they push their
So
agenda. We have a lot of information about that too.
we do. So, Carrie, I appreciate your time tonight. I think that we have a lot more to talk about,
Yeah.
but we kind of just wanted to get our feet wet with this. We hope everyone enjoys listening.
Mhm.
If there are any topics of discussion that you would want us to address that maybe we haven't thought about, we're happy to talk about anything.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep,
Would you?
send it our way.
Yeah.
We want to hear from you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for tuning in. Good night.
Good night.